this poem is called Happy Birthday Moon, and it's when I thought about where does my language begin, I thought about my dad reading to me this book called Happy Birthday Moon. I don't know if anyone's heard of it. It's a children's picture book, and it tells a story about this bear who lives out in the woods. And this one particular day, he stands on this hill and he looks up at the moon and he can see the valleys and the trees and the river. And the bear says, "It's my birthday." And because of the vastness of the valley, his voice echoes and he hears his voice again, "It's my birthday." And the bear happens to be looking at the moon and he thinks that it's the moon telling him that it's his birthday. So it sets up this whole kind of story, this night that this bear spends with the moon. And my dad didn't know I was deaf until I was 6. So because of all of the repetition that was in it, because of all of the visual, it was a very kind of striking book. I think it really made an impact for me that kind of planted something, which perhaps manifested in me growing up and writing poetry and being in spaces like this and sharing. So I would like you to think about what that means to you. Where does your language begin? Who do you have to thank for it? What can you say to them today? So thank you so much for listening. This is my last poem. Happy Birthday Moon. Dad reads aloud. I follow his finger across the page. Sometimes his finger moves past words, tracing white space. He makes the moon say something new every night to his deaf son who slurs his speech. Sometimes his finger moves past words, tracing white space. Tonight, he gives the moon my name, but I can't say it. His deaf son who slurs his speech. Dad taps the page, says, try again. Tonight, he gives the moon my name, but I can't say it. I say, Raymond. He laughs. Dad taps the page, says, try again. But I like making him laugh. I say my mistake again. I say, Raymond. He laughs, says, Raymond, yes, something else. I like making him laugh. I say my mistake again. Raymond. What else will help us? He says, Raymond, yes, something else. I'd like to be the moon, the bear, even the rain. Raymond. What else will help us hear each other? Really hear each other. I'd like to be the moon, the bear, even the rain. Dad makes the moon say something new every night, and we hear each other, really hear each other. As Dad reads aloud, I follow his finger across the page. Thank you. All right.
So one of the things, I've been kind of returning to your 2 amazing books, and I wanted to ask you about the closed captions in this collection. So if you've not seen the book, if you've not read the book yet, there's these closed captions which are inspired by an artist. And I just thought they were so interesting. Some of my favourite ones, so they're like little lines. My favourite one was sound like a broken beginning. And hold on. I've got a bit in a sound of time passing. And in an interview, you said that you wanted to undo the mainstream idea of sound, and you think that's a useful endeavour. And it's definitely, these captions have definitely done that for me. So, and I was thinking they're like little bridges between poems, they're interruptions, they make the poetry book as a whole feel like this kind of like filmic, but that's not quite right either. So I was thinking, what are they doing for you? What did you want them to do in the collection?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Thank you. So at the beginning of this book, you see the first caption here. So you open the book and there's closure captions up there and it says sound of mouth and arms opening. And then a poem begins. And so throughout the book, sometimes you get multiple captions that appear. So you've got 3. Sound of self divided running breath on paper. And so, yeah, the book, that the captions serve multiple functions. One is, as you were saying, the kind of undoing of what I think hearing people take for granted, which is just sound. It's just this thing that you're bored with, and it's just chucked at you, and you just got to kind of, manage it, and there's a way to understand it. But actually, our experience of sound is different. And there's a kind of subjectivity to it, which I wanted to create with the captions. So, for example, when I watch a film, like during the pandemic, I wasn't a big TV watcher, but now I am, because it's actually really good. Like, I binged all of these TV things that people talk about, and I'm just like, oh, no. And I was like, oh, wow, like, I think Breaking Bad might have been the first one I've got all the way through. And I was like, Jesus, this is like, just as a writer, it's fantastic. Anyway, but I'm watching all of this stuff with captions. I mean, I was even watching things which I remember watching when I was a kid, but this time with captions, and realizing that I'd misheard quite a few scenes. And I was like, oh, it doesn't say that. Oh, no. So anyway, I then thought that there were parts where like sounds would be captioned. So I don't hear any high pitched sounds, for example. So it would say like whistle blows or sound of cattle or something. And I'll be like, wow, I hear nothing there. So because the caption invites you to imagine the sound. And I realized that when you write down a caption, that democratizes that experience, that gives it to everyone. So then everyone gets to imagine the sound. And then that's not just, you can mix up the senses as a kind of synesthesia, because sound can also become a place, can also become a memory, even a touch, even another sense. So, so throughout the book, and even the fact that my hand is on the book, it's kind of an attempt at reaching it, touching it. There's my wedding ring. I wrote this out my first year as a married person. All of the stuff that was kind of going through my head around sense making, and I needed almost to put holes in the narratives of the book, and the captions was a generous and a fun way to do that. But yeah, people don't ask me about the captions, so I'm glad you did.
It's like in my first book, I used loads of influence from Ovid's Metamorphosis, and I was proud of myself, because I thought, this is going to make me sound dead intelligent, and nobody noticed. But I was thinking about the captions as well as a way of making the reader much more active.
Yeah,
because
totally.
It asks us, well, what does a broken beginning sound like? What does the sound of arms and mouths opening and closing, I think, is another one. What would that sound like? And everyone's going to come up with a different answer for that.
Yeah.
So was that something that you were aiming to do as well? That reaching out with a hand is interesting.
Yeah.
Making the reader more active.
Yeah, definitely. Believe it or not, I want readers, and I want people to have an experience which is unique to what I offer, what we offer as poets, and I also wanted to include deaf people, or people who think about the senses, people who live or think about disability and their bodies in different ways. And I find that this idea of even we have accessibility, and I feel like the very question of accessibility can be a creative question. I don't think it has to be this, oh God, we got to tick some boxes now, oh God. There's some real creative opportunities, I think, for us to really play with that and look at what that is. So because in the first book as well, there are different versions of every book I write. So there's obviously the written version, and then there's the audio version, and then there's a live version where I incorporate and work with interpreters and BSL performers. So, and all of those three are different experiences of in the same body. And that's interesting to me. I enjoy that. But it is a way of reaching out. I am trying to connect with people.
I was thinking about the first time I saw you performed at Ledbury Poetry Festival, and I think you read the poem "Dear Hearing World."
Oh yeah.
And you did some sign.
Yeah.
I think you might have been like starting to do that, and I thought it was the most amazing thing. It felt like the body as a way of knowing and poetry as a way of knowing was something that you were experimenting with.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, because it wasn't something I did straight out the gate, or thinking about my deafness in a way that was poetic, or disability in a way that was poetic. I didn't feel like that was encouraged, if I'm honest. But then Dear Hearing World, I wrote almost in this kind of resistance or a way to push back against all the ideas, probably, which were partly mine, that were like, no, I shouldn't write about this part of me. And because it was written, so it's a poem that's written as a letter. I went back. So I was educated in a school called Blanche Neville's in London, it's a deaf school, and I went back as a poet in residence for 6 months to work with deaf young people, deaf and hard of hearing, incorporating sign to, the poetry and performance. And I thought, because you know how everything new is meant to be better. You know how that myth.
It is.
So exactly, it's not. So I went back thinking everything will be improved, and actually it's got worse. Deaf education is in a worse state now than it was when I was at school, in terms of the funding, in terms of the support for the teachers, in terms of the quality of the teaching. Deaf schools are now much smaller, so there are now 60 students in that school. There were 150 when I was there, and the students that do make it, like if I was coming up now and going to school, I wouldn't be in a deaf school because I'm not deaf enough to have that. So what's happened is the government have basically put all disabilities, all needs in one place and said so it's not specialized anymore. It's horrific. It was so disturbing to me that and that was one of my responses writing this poem, which begins, Dear Hearing World, I have left Earth in search of sound or orbits, a solar system where the space between a star and a planet isn't empty. I have left a white beard of noise in my space, and none of you will know the difference. We are indeed the same volume. All of us eventually fade. So it's like this. I can't, that's why I had to stop doing it, because it just made me so angry every time I did it. It's just too much for me.
I played a video of you reading it to my young writers group, and one of the students who had not really engaged very much kind of threw themselves off the chair in like, oh, that was amazing. It's like opened poetry for them.
That's beautiful.
I should have written to you to tell you that.
Oh, people are busy. It's all good.
Yeah, moments like that, they happen in my workshops all the time. So I wanted to talk a little bit about. So there's a great quote from a poet called Anne-Marie Chullian. I'm probably saying her name wrong. She's an Irish poet, and she talks about giving herself permission to circle around the same themes over and over again.
Yeah. And
the idea that you have to move on from book to book and develop. Yeah. Being a patriarchal, heteronormative construct that she doesn't agree with. And I just thought it was so beautiful to give yourself permission to go deeper into your preoccupations or themes. And I think that's partly what this new book does, because I was thinking about your name in the first book, and you write about the sound, whereas the second book you're going into the kind of social and political and personal history of it. I just wonder if you could talk a little. They're not really questions that I'm asking. I'm just saying, talk about that, Raymond. Off you go.
I think, the ambitions are different, right? Like book to book, and I felt a real urge to keep writing. So this book changed my life. Like I suddenly got this whole new light on me. But then I would read read from the poems and be like, no, there's more I need to say here. So it didn't feel resolved for me. So then the next All the Names Given kind of balanced it out a bit. And I think we're talking about this, like it's a bit more of an internal book. This is, if you talk about faces, if this is the face, this is the thought behind the face in some ways. So, you know, and but I'm also interested in art, like visual art. I mean, I like, so one of the things, talking about like getting geeky with poetry, like one of the things I really kind of that excites me is that when you've got the poem and then you have to figure out how to make it look, the shape that it's going to make, where the last word of each of your sentence has to be a word that's going to make someone continue reading. Mm-hmm. It's like a real game, like hold someone on the page. Mm-hmm. And in a different way with putting it out, you know, reading. And so I'm also trying to do that, you know, in the body, in the voice, and making those things meet. So yeah, I'm just like I'm just a nerd. But I'm also trying, like I say, I'm also trying to connect with people in a way that is, you know, my kind of authentic self is something that people say nowadays. Authenticity is this thing. And I think I'm actually trained in art therapy. So I've gone into prisons and schools, you know, for the last 10 years doing that, and just listened to so many different people, you know, write and speak about some of their traumas, but, you know, also some of their joys. And you know, I have seen the impact, the very powerful impact of doing that. And this idea of that being you know, a healing for someone. Mm. And I feel that poetry has an element of that has done that for me. I know that, you know, when we talk about craft, we're not really meant to talk about these things, like the kind of what I think is very real cathartic kind of element, experience of writing. But, you know, again, there's a school of thought that's like not serious. I've just read a William Wordsworth biography, and he's got a whole thing that he wrote a letter to Coleridge, actually talking about how the lowest allurement of poetry is incident. Isn't that interesting? The lowest allurement of poetry is incident. And so to that is like specific into like storytelling within poetry is a low form of poetry. And I was like, and I love Wordsworth. I just want to say that straight up. I love Wordsworth. But I mean, but then it's kind of this thing, isn't it? Like you don't have to agree with all the people. You know, like.
What does allurement mean?
Allurement. Allure. So if you're attracted to something. Yes, yeah. Sorry, yeah. Did I say that right? Yeah.
Yeah, I've just been deep diving into Keats, and I've been driven. I'm really enjoying it, and I'm being driven mad by the way he just publishes fragments, and it's like, oh well.
Yeah.
I've just got bored of that. I'm just finishing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was a kid. Don't forget.
Yeah, I know. I'm being harsh. I had another question when you were talking before Wordsworth. What were you talking before?
Oh, I would think about therapy.
Yes, well, I wanted to ask, because I know you've got Ray's got to run for a train, haven't you? Like, we're literally letting him loose down Oldham Street. But I wanted to ask about activism, and going back to that Wordsworth quote as well. I've been Jonathan Culler, who's a lyric theorist, talks about lyric poetry. If you go back to the history of the word, as being a form of writing to persuade, epideictic discourse to persuade or praise. And I was wondering do you see your work as a form of activism, of transformation? Because I feel like it transforms. Reading the second collection and the first one feels like it transforms the world for me. Like I was walking down the street doing my own closed captions. But I wondered how you feel with that, because there's this discomfort in poetry. And I think not all poetry has to be like that, but... Yeah,
no, that's fair. I've noticed that there is a strange kind of hierarchy of like art in this country where it's kind of like if it's political, it's lesser than. Like I've heard that as a criticism, and that's always kind of, I don't know, kind of got confused me a bit.
It depends what we think of is political, though, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
it's such a narrow definition.
Yeah. But I do think that transformation and transcendence is something I'm interested in. Transformation and transcendence. Oh man. But like, yeah, that if that can happen in a poem, in a book, then I think that's
That's
great.
the aim, isn't it?
Yes, the aim is what you're going for, right?
Yeah.
I'm talk about old poets. I'm a big fan of John Donne. I think John Donne is one of the incredible, love poetry, but it really is a transcendence. There's just so much almost violent passion in it.
Yeah.
in a way that's also scary and beautiful and all these things. He was a preacher, and so my granddad was a preacher, and I have all of his sermons, and he was also a poet, but he was an unpublished poet in his time.
Your granddad was...
My granddad,
Wow.
yeah. And so I kind of feel like I'm speaking or trying to speak to him, because he was also a pacifist, and he was also, he spoke out against the war. He did some time in jail as a pacifist. And like...
Are you going to do anything with his sermons?
So the interesting thing, you might relate to this, and if you've ever done any research, and you come across documents and artifacts and these things which are essentially dead, but it's your job as the living artist to bring them to life. So how do you enliven a dead document? And if I'm honest, my granddad's sermons mostly feel quite dead because of how specific they are. They speak, like he's got like whole lines where it's like, remember Miss Morg's wedding anniversary, remember like little notes reminding himself to, it's like community. It's like he's trying to say, oh, I see you. I know that you've been having problems. Oh. Are you okay? It's very specific. So it's like, so for me personally, there wasn't anything I couldn't transcend it almost. So I had to just kind of let that wash over me and write I've tried so many things. I tried to write sermons. I tried to like lift. There's one poem actually in All the Names Given where I kind of used a line from my granddad in language science. One of his sermons is a quote from the Corinthians. How shall it be known what is spoken? For ye shall speak in the air. And then, he says something about, there's something here. There's some line which I use. Oh, maybe I didn't make it in. Maybe it did get edited out. Sorry. Yeah. So, it's still there though, right? Because we're still creating, we're still living, and we're still finding ways to bring these things to life. But to speak about like activism and politics, like all of, I'm raised by a man who tried to be a Rasta, but just failed, because you're not meant to drink if you're a Rasta. You're not meant to eat meat if you're a Rasta. Definitely not meant to have any addictions and gambling problems. My dad did all of that. So, and then my mom, who's like, from the outside, you might look at her as like some 60s hippie. She hates that term. But like, so I've grown up in a very creative, open, I had quite a childhood that a lot of people would call strange, but it's actually just quite, going to protests where I saw some of the first ever poets. I saw a man called Adrian Mitchell say through a megaphone, "Tell me lies about Vietnam," and then I saw him again during the maybe might even been the last protest he ever did before he died, but the Iraq War March. So poets always had this presence at marches, and they took their poems to these marches as kind of rallies, as kind of ways of exciting and engaging people. Like, this is what we need to think about. This is where I'm giving my energy. And it's a rousing thing.
So poetry outside the page right from the beginning. They're waving at me because your train
Oh,
is
right.
going to leave
Oh, right.
without
Oh, right.
you.
Sorry.
So
Yeah.
we could talk for another 2 hours.
Yeah.
We're not allowed.
So good. Yeah. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Raymond. It's been fascinating talking
Thank
to
you.
you.
Oh, well, thank you. Run.